LiberalViewer presents.
So, while most end-of-the-year political news was focused on the big fiscal cliff negotiations, in the last few days of 2012, the U.S. Senate also passed and President Barack Obama also signed a reauthorization of the FISA Amendments Act, a warrantless wiretapping program that monitors vast amounts of Americans' international communications without any evidence of wrongdoing, and which supposedly straight news anchor Bret Baier misreported on Fox News' special report program like this.
President Obama signed a 5-year extension of the U.S. government's authority to monitor the overseas activity of suspected foreign spies and terrorists. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, allows the government to monitor overseas calls and emails without obtaining a court order. The law does not apply to Americans.
That's just dishonest, because claiming the recently renewed FISA Amendments Act does not apply to Americans is not an accurate description of the scope of this law, which doesn't allow Americans as the targets of warrantless wiretapping, but if international phone calls and emails from Americans in the United States are received by the non-American target, they get collected too, as Jamil Jaffer of the ACLU explained in testimony to the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security in this clip.
In essence, this act allows the dragnet surveillance of Americans' international communications. Although it bars the government from intentionally targeting people who are overseas, inside the United States, it places virtually no restrictions on targeting people overseas, even if those targets are communicating with U.S. citizens and residents. The Act's effect is to give the government nearly unrestricted access to Americans' international phone calls and emails. It permits the government to acquire those communications without requiring it to specify the people or facilities to be monitored, without requiring it to comply with meaningful limitations on retention, use, and dissemination, and without requiring it to obtain individualized warrants, or even to make prior administrative determinations that the targets of government surveillance are foreign agents or connected in any way to terrorism.
Yow, that's pretty broad warrantless wiretapping authority, much broader than what the supposedly straight news program on Fox reported, especially considering the way new technology allows the targeting of communications with entire countries, as Jamil Jaffer of the ACLU went on to explain here.
The technology is more advanced now, but the Act authorizes what the framers would have described as general warrants. A single surveillance order can be used to justify the monitoring of millions of communications. It can authorize the acquisition of all phone calls to or from a country of foreign policy interest, Russia or Iran or Mexico, for example, including phone calls to and from U.S. citizens inside the United States. To engage in that kind of surveillance, the government would need to target people outside the United States. But in targeting people outside the United States, it would collect countless Americans' private communications.
So, Fox News was dishonest in reporting that the recently renewed FISA Amendments Act does not apply to Americans, and, of course, being on Fox News, supposedly straight news anchor Bret Baier couldn't finish the story without an additional dishonest dig at President Obama that you can see in the continuation of that Fox News story here.
Civil rights campaigners are dismayed. They say the law violates the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. They sound a bit more like President Obama before he took office. In 2005, Senator Obama said of warrantless wiretapping during the Bush administration, quote, "Once we have more information, we'll know to what degree our laws were circumvented. But regardless, I am certain that we can do the intelligence gathering we need to do without eroding the civil liberties our founding fathers intended."
Now, it's kind of odd that Fox News would stretch back to 2005 for an Obama quote on FISA, before the recently renewed FISA Amendments Act was even proposed, especially given that the original FISA Amendments Act came up for a vote during the 2008 election, and as I pointed out in my 2008 video, ACLU Fights Wiretapping approved by Obama, McCain, and Bush, then Senator Obama, while running for president, voted in favor of the act just recently renewed by Congress and signed by Obama. So, rather than representing some Obama hypocrisy, as Fox News implied, Obama's current position is consistent with the centrist political pragmatism he showed in 2008. That's why, in addition to supporting Obama as the best candidate for president in 2008 and 2012, I also give time, money, and effort supporting the nonpartisan American Civil Liberties Union that fights to protect constitutional principles, whatever the polls and whoever is in office. And the ACLU's challenge of this warrantless wiretapping program was actually argued before the U.S. Supreme Court last October, with a decision, at least on the standing issues, expected this spring. I'm actually optimistic the judicial branch, as the least political branch, will eventually put some real limits on this warrantless wiretapping program, but I want to know what you think. Does this warrantless wiretapping program violate the U.S. Constitution by apparently monitoring vast amounts of Americans' international communications without any evidence of wrongdoing? And regardless of your personal opinion, will the U.S. Supreme Court eventually limit this vast authority given to the U.S. government to spy on its own citizens?
YouTube, you decide.